Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Welcome to the show this evening. We have a very special guest, someone who I have worked with for quite a few years way back when. David Herlihy is an attorney, and he's the executive director for the Vermont Board of Medical Practices, and I'll introduce you to David in a moment. Also joining us is Ben Kinsley, who is a co-sponsor, co-producer, and co-host. Ben, you want to give us your sponsorships?
Lots of titles.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a consulting firm. It's called Imperium Advisors. We do a whole bunch of different things. Started out as a policy research and development organization. Quickly realized that it's not enough just to have a good idea. You also have to be able to sell that idea. So from that came strategic communications, government relations, social media, a whole bunch of different services that we now offer. So if you have a nonprofit here in Vermont and are looking to connect with your audience with the right message, look us up, imperiumvt.com.
Thank you very much. And now, without further ado, and with the promise that he will not tell any of my secrets, is David Herlihy. David, welcome to the show.
Hi, Pat. Great to see you.
Thank you. You too. We ran into each other in the State House not too long ago, but before that, I hadn't seen you in a long time. So could you give our viewers a little bit of your background and how you came to be the ED of the Medical Practice Board?
Sure. Yeah. You know most of the story. So I had been away from Vermont, serving in the military on active duty, and decided I wanted to come back to Vermont. And so I took a job in the Attorney General's office, and they had me doing a lot of cases over at the Personnel Department, as it was known then. And ended up spending a lot of time with everybody there, including you.
Yes.
You were a great commissioner a couple different times.
Yes,
and,
right.
Enjoyed working as an assistant AG and with HR, as it's called now, a lot, human resources, and went on to be general counsel and also the commissioner there for a while too. And then I went away. I had continued my military career in the National Guard after I came back to Vermont. And so I went away for actually a couple times when I was at HR. The first time I went to Iraq back not too long after 9/11, and then went away again in 2009 to Afghanistan. And then at the time I was the commissioner, and Governor Douglas didn't run again while I was gone. And so I kind of had to find a job from overseas, and I heard about the job at the medical board being available, and had worked with them a couple of times on some issues that they had come up that I consulted with as an attorney. And also had a friend in the AG's office who represented the board in their casework, and I thought it would be interesting and applied for the job, and the rest is history. I've been there. It'll be not too long. It'll be 10 years that I've been there.
Wow.
So.
How time flies, David. That's great. You just skipped over that military history of yours. I saw an article about you that you have served 31 years of active duty, including several deployments, as you mentioned, and now you are the rank of colonel. And we're going to put your picture up because that is one handsome picture, David.
Well, I just got done actually earlier this year in March. I wrapped up. It was
Did you?
a total of 33 years. And
oh my God.
So I had about I guess it worked out to about 11 years of full-time active duty, and then I was active in the National Guard for over 20 years.
That is amazing. That's great. We're always glad when you came back safe and sound, and want to thank you for your service. Because I remember going over to visit you at Camp Johnson when you were working with a group of soldiers who were going overseas, and you were, because you're an attorney, you were doing their wills and different documents that they would need before they to protect their family before they went overseas. I was quite interested. Do you remember that? I was very excited to be there. That was very impressive.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your service. That doesn't go unnoticed, and it's much appreciated. But one of the thing that we're talking about mostly today is the Medical Practice Board, what that is, what that does, and why it's relevant. Could you describe a little bit about the makeup of the board and what its functions are?
Sure, I'd love to do that. And, I just want to say thank you to you both because getting the word out about the board is really important, I think. The board is an organization that's made up, we have 17 board members who are from all over the state, and we have 9 MDs, medical doctors, and I don't say physicians because osteopathic physicians are not under our board, and chiropractic physicians, some other kinds of physicians, but we have medical doctors are the physicians, and we also have podiatrists who are also doctors, and we have 1 podiatry member to go along with our 9 MD members, and we have a physician assistant member, and then we also have 6 public members who are a really important part of our board. And those are, individuals who have no relation to the practice of medicine, but who are, public-minded and serve on the board. And, we are, as far as public board work, we are probably one of the most demanding and have the most homework of any board members I can imagine. And our board members are appointed by the governor, and they serve for 5-year terms, and they're limited to having 2 5-year terms. But most of them, despite the hard work and almost zero pay, most of them sign up for a second term and continue and do 10 years of service on the board. So, one of the best things about my job is that I get to spend time with these wonderful people, and they just give and give and give. And, they're all busy people, and it just amazes me every time I go to a meeting how much work they all do. And maybe after I explain more about the work that we do, everyone will understand when I say just how much time they all put in. So we also have a staff of full-time people. We have investigators and other support staff and licensing specialists who do the work. So what we do I started talking about the board. I didn't say what we do. We license and oversee the practice of medicine by physicians, physician assistants, podiatrists, and then we also have a couple of smaller professions, anesthesiologist assistants and radiologist assistants. And then we also license and oversee practice by residents. And we have 2 residency programs, and that's the training programs for physicians. And we have the big program that everybody knows about at UVM. And we also get a lot of residents from Dartmouth-Hitchcock come and practice, do rotations at Vermont sites, and they need to be licensed here as well. And then we also have a podiatry program down at Southwestern Vermont Medical Center in Bennington that very few people know about, but we have a wonderful podiatrist down there, Dr. Sarcino, who's been running a podiatry program for many years. And that's really important because podiatry is an essential service, and with the aging population and also the prevalence of diabetes in our population all over the United States, it's really important because that's a condition that causes a lot of foot problems that need podiatrist attention. So
that's great.
So we license all those professions, and then we oversee their practice. And when I say we oversee their practice, we get complaints and we investigate all complaints, and that's in the law that the board investigates all complaints. But then we also get, in addition to complaints, we get anonymous tips. We get reports of malpractice settlements, and all different ways. We learn about possible problems. Sometimes it's by turning on WCAX or opening up the newspaper and seeing that somebody's gotten themselves in trouble.
What's your authority? You would pull licenses and then refer them, if it's a criminal thing, refer them to the case to state police, or what happens when the investigation hasn't gone so well for the doctor?
So, well, with the criminal case, we very often when charges come up, and we've had a couple of these recently with licensees who've one of which was in the news, get accused of criminal infractions, and typically what we'll do is we have the power under the law to do a summary suspension based on if we have a sort of the equivalent of probable cause. In the criminal world, we have a good basis of fact to take an action, and we can do a temporary action to take away their license for the time being until we can have a more involved look. And typically with a criminal charge, that means waiting for the criminal matter to get resolved first.
Wow. Amazing.
I can imagine, does your board or your staff ever get called as expert witnesses for criminal proceedings? Because I got to imagine that when you're talking about standards of practice, that's something that's kind of in your wheelhouse.
No, we really don't. We don't get called in to sometimes we will work with the authorities when they have matters going on that involve medical care, but and we'll coordinate, and of course these days with all the opioid problems, there are quite a few cases where potentially there could also be criminal charges, but fortunately we're lucky enough in Vermont that our licensees are a pretty well-behaved bunch, and we don't have pill mills like they have in some other states. So.
David, I'm sorry. You report into the health department, correct?
That's right. Yes.
But the OPR, which is the Office of Professional Regulations, which sort of takes over the other side of the healthcare, there they regulate nurses, osteopaths, and a few other professionals. Why do they have it split out like that? The OPR reports into the Secretary of State. Why is that split up like that? Not that you want all this work, but.
Well, historically, there's a few different parts to that question. Really, the osteopaths are separate in quite a few states, and that's just a historic. And more and more, it's coming to be where they're both under the same boards. And a lot of the viewers may not understand that osteopaths are historically it's a type of physician who focused on the skeletal system and the relation of the skeletal system to health, but it's really become a much broader practice now, and there's almost in many respects there's very little difference between what osteopaths and physicians can and the tasks that they do perform. There are osteopaths who, it's common for osteopaths to just be general surgeons, or there's osteopaths who become psychiatrists or OBGYNs. So the distinction is becoming much less, and the training programs are becoming overseen by a single body, and the osteopaths now often take the same licensing exam that physicians take, and allopathic physicians, which is the technical term for MDs. Maybe someday they will be combined, but right now I think it's just sort of inertia, and the osteopaths are used to having their own regulation, and that's the way it is for now. But in general, you talk about, well, why are some professions in OPR and medical doctors and the other professions we have in the health department? And, I'm appointed by the Commissioner of Health, and I think that really one of the biggest reasons is that it's a public health function overseeing the practice of medicine, and the board is responsible for providing guidance and policy in a lot of areas, everything from opioid prescribing to as Pat, you and I in an earlier conversation, you mentioned the board had done a new policy on recommendations for how physicians should act in intimate exams.
Oh, right.
And, there's a lot of policy work, and the tie-in to public health is very, when you do this every day, it becomes very clear. I work closely with a lot of different professionals and different divisions at the health department, and there's a real synergy there. And so I work with the people in the ADAP, which is the drug and alcohol programs, working on the addiction issues, and all different divisions within the department.
I read a note that said that there was a recommendation that your board join OPR, but in fact, after listening to you, I would think it should be reversed, because it's all about healthcare, and that's the Department of Health, not necessarily Secretary of State, although that's the licensing end of things. But
right.
I have to answer that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I've been involved a lot with national organizations that deal with this, and the saying is, when you've seen one medical board, you've seen one medical board, and so in every state. There's some trends, and there's some states that are like us, and they have the medical board in the health department, and then there's some that have it in a more of an administrative department, and there are advantages and disadvantages, but I've really enjoyed, had really great relations with the health commissioners, and they've really had good working relationships with the board. And I think that, the fact that my appointing authority, which is, the hiring authority in government, that's the term that's used for employees like me who aren't under the contract. So I'm appointed by the health commissioner, and I think it really does, it just soaks into everything we do, and it informs everything we do, the attitude that we take. It's public health. That's
great. We're keeping that Commissioner of Health busy these days. I'm wondering if he's thrilled to do that job.
He certainly is.
Listen, you wanted to talk about hospital licensing, which falls under your purview as well. So do you want to take a few minutes to talk about that?
Sure, I'd love to let people know about that as well. So, the Department of Health licenses Vermont's hospitals, and we have hospitals all around the state. I'm sure viewers are familiar with them in every corner of the state, from Newport to St. Albans to Bennington to Brattleboro. We really cover all the four corners and everything in between. Of course, the big one is UVM, but all the way down to our tiniest hospitals like Grace Cottage or Gifford Medical Center. So they're licensed and overseen as well by the health department, and there's a board called the Board of Health that I work with on their licensing, and then I also work a lot with the Division of Licensing and Protection at Dale, and which is another department at the Agency of Human Services, and they do all the oversight for the federal payment programs, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And so they also, under an MOU with us, do investigations of hospitals. So, there's a lot of people out there that don't understand, and that's, one of my real goals for having this conversation with you and getting the word out there that, whether your concerns are with something that a doctor or a PA or one of our other licensees has done, or something that happened to you in the hospital that's not, any individual, but you think the hospital didn't do a good job. You do have the right to ask your state government to look into it, and we do take all complaints seriously. And so for anybody who wants to file a complaint with the board, I can give you the contact information later, or you can contact the board if you have a concern about your MD or PA or podiatrist. And the same holds true. You can contact the intake people at the Division of Licensing and Protection and complain about a hospital as well.
Wow, great. Thank you. We'll put that at the end of the show so people see it.
How many complaints does the Board of Medical Practice and some of the other organizations that deal with healthcare, whether it's hospitals or other providers, like how many complaints of those come in every year? Do you have an idea of that?
Well, for for our licensees, we average it varies. Well, first of all, we have a little bit over 4,000 licensees. We have almost 4,000 MDs, and then quite a bit. The next largest group is the PAs. I'm not sure what the number is today, but somewhere around 400 PAs. And then much smaller numbers of podiatrists and anesthesiologist assistants and radiologist assistants. And then we have quite a few residents between the UVM program and the Dartmouth program and the smaller podiatry program down in Bennington. But anyway, so with about all told, 4,000 to 4,500, and the number goes up, it goes down. People get a license, come here maybe for a temporary assignment, and then leave and let it lapse when it comes time to renew. With that many, we have anywhere from about 250 to maybe 350 complaints. I shouldn't say complaints, cases a year. Many of those complaints, but as I said, some of them may be based on a headline in the newspaper or an anonymous tip or some other source report of a malpractice settlement, which is we get notices about all the malpractice settlements that relate to any of our licensees. That's a federal program, and so and out of that number, we investigate cases very carefully. And in an average year, we have probably somewhere around maybe 15 to 20 public actions. And so it varies a little bit year to year, but about 5% of the cases end up being a problem for the licensee. And the vast majority of those are resolved with a settlement, a stipulated settlement, where we say we think there's a problem here, and then the physician agrees to an action. And most of the time our actions don't involve revoking a license or suspending the physician, taking them out of practice. It's normally a requirement for some training, and maybe a practice monitor are the most common sanctions, along with maybe an administrative financial penalty, or a fine, as most people would call it, and a reprimand. But every once in a while, things get real serious, and we have to revoke a license.
Ooh. Yeah, so, I actually only know 2 doctors in the 22 years I've been here that went awry of the policies and procedures. So most doctors here are fabulous, as you said. They're good people.
Do you find you have repeat offenders, or do people get the message the first time?
Well, we do have people who have more than one action, and
Hello.
and honestly, typically that is, I would say, a lot of our people who've had multiple actions. It's because of a personal problem with substance abuse. Unfortunately, is probably the most common reason why we see more than one case. But and something else I should say about our cases. So the work that we do, it's all confidential under the law. It's not all confidential. It's all confidential unless and until there is a public action or there are charges filed, and then it becomes very public. And not only is it public, but all the actions are posted right out on our website for 10 years. And we have profiles that you can search. Anybody who wants to search about their doctor can go right onto our website. And it's easy to find the place where you look up your physician, you put in their name, and you can get all kinds of information about where they went to school. Have they had problems with, discipline actions by us or by any other jurisdiction where they might be licensed, and also some malpractice information. And so, that's the way it is. I think if not every state, almost every state has it set up that way, and that's just so that there's a very low threshold. Anybody can file a complaint, and but it's only when a problem has been identified by the board that it becomes public.
But David, when you talk to these people and your investigators talk to them, are they sworn in? Is it something that can be used later on in an official court case, or is it just chatting between two people?
Well, our investigators are law enforcement officers. They're required to be law enforcement officers, and so it is a crime to make a false statement to a law enforcement officer, and and sometimes they have to remind witnesses that they are law enforcement officers, and so that's one reason why we do that, because it really it's a very high stakes game when we're talking about the right to practice medicine. It takes a lot of work and a lot of money, and society has a big investment in those people being able to practice. So, yeah.
Makes me feel better that way. That's great, because I know at DMV there was always a discussion, de novo, the back and forth. And I always thought if people were being investigated, I think they should tell the truth right up front. I mean, that's just the way it should be. So there you go.
Definitely. So let's back up a little bit, because we talked about like how that complaint process works a little bit. But how does someone become licensed? How does that work in Vermont?
Oh, well, they have to start working very hard when they're very young, because, as you know, it's hard to get into medical school. But so you have to graduate from medical school, and that could be in the United States or overseas. We have, as all over the country, about 30% of physicians who are being licensed every year now, and are what we call foreign medical grads. And so they, after they finish medical school, they all have to take an examination, whether they're a foreign medical grad or U.S. medical grad. They have to take the USMLE, which is a really demanding, it's actually 4-part test. And there are tests of clinical skills that are really complex. They have actors and scenarios where they're basically taking care of patients who are trained actors going in, and they're being observed, and they have to create notes, and as well as testing all their basic science knowledge and medical knowledge. So there's a lot that goes into just getting to the point where you complete medical school, and then you get into the residency program, and these tests straddle. You start while you're still in medical school, and the exam process is completed then in residency. when the final step is taken. And so in every state, doctors now take the same exam. It used to be the states gave their individual own, Vermont wrote their own test questions, and every state had its own little exam, but now it's this United States medical licensing exam. So they have to do that, and they also have to complete residency. And typically, most physicians spend anywhere from 4 to 6, 7, 8 years in residency and fellowship training. And fellowship is just sort of the more senior level of residency training for more involved programs. But the requirement in the law is that you have to have, if you went to medical school in the U.S., you have to have 2 years of residency training in order to get a license. And if you were overseas trained in medical school, you have to have 3 years of United States residency. So it takes a lot. And then they have to, they are scrutinized like you wouldn't believe. They have to give us all kinds of information about all their education and training, and answer all kinds of questions about, have you ever had any criminal involvements, and have you ever lost any license of any kind for any medical profession? Because we see a lot of physicians who maybe started out as an EMT or a nurse or some other profession that's still in the greater house of medicine, as they call it. And so they just have to give up all kinds of information, and it's quite an involved process. There's about, I think we're up to, I think there's 126 questions on our initial physician application now, and they have to say everything they've a complete history of everything they've done since they left medical school.
And we wonder why there's a shortage.
Yeah.
Do you deal with the Green Mountain Care Board at all? I was just wondering with what you know about the medical profession, if they ever tap your brain on anything.
No, sometimes, we're involved giving input on related issues. And so we'll be sitting in the same hearing rooms at the State House, giving our views on different bills to the Senate Health and Welfare Committee or House Health Care Committee. But really, they are more interested in the healthcare markets and keeping a balance of how the finances are going to work, where fortunately we don't have to worry about money in our work. We just focus on the practice issues.
That's great. I've always heard stories about how hard it is for foreign doctors who maybe have studied overseas and then come over here, that it's hard for them to get a license here. Is that true? Because it doesn't sound like it at all. It sounds like we recognize the schools that they've gone to and they can be licensed here. Or is that what is the story?
Well, it is really, I think it is really hard for them, and when we talk about foreign medical grads, I should say people may be surprised. A lot of foreign medical grads, were born in the United States and went to college in the U.S., but then for whatever reasons chose to go to a medical school outside the U.S. And so anybody who goes to a school outside the U.S. goes through the same process, whether they were born here or born overseas. And so there's an organization called the ECFMG, and that's the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, and they have different programs that help all the state medical boards. They do a process of verification of that overseas medical education and they have. So in other words, it would be hard for us if we got a diploma from, even with a translation, if we got a diploma from, a medical school in Russia or, wherever it may be, to understand what it is, even with a translation, and to be able to recognize it as being genuine or counterfeit. And so they do research on the background and bona fides of the individual who's applying. And so everybody has to have an ECFMG certificate who comes from overseas. But I'll say this, that they, the challenges, especially for somebody who doesn't, speak English as a native language. I mean, this is really, there's a lot of high stakes testing involved,
right,
in order to be able to come here and get into the residency programs. And trying to compete to get into a residency program for the required training is just, we get the cream of the crop. And it's, I think it's great. It's great that we can offer opportunity to these people who've worked hard and done great. But sometimes I feel bad because when I think about, we get a lot of physicians from other countries. As you know, you go to the hospital and sometimes, it seems like you're at the United Nations because there's people from all over the world.
That's a good thing.
And it's great. And they provide great care. And it's like I said, 30% of the physicians now in the United States, more or less, are foreign medical grads. And that just means, we are benefiting the best and the brightest from these other countries want to come here and practice. And so, if we didn't have that, we'd have to build more medical schools and,
right.
So.
Right. Well, we like our medical hospitals here, especially mine down the street here in Washington County. It's great. So I read in the minutes, I was actually reading your minutes. I don't have a life here, but they were very interesting. You were referencing the North Investigative Committee, the Central Investigative Committee, and then the licensing committee itself, what do you have different groups in around the state to do stuff for you? Or?
Sure. So what we do is we assign our members based on where they live and practice. And the reason we do that, we have the 3 separate committees. And then, like, for instance, if we have a case involving a physician from UVM Medical Center, we'll typically assign that case, to maybe the South Committee, and we wouldn't assign it to the North Committee, which has people, a lot of them are from around Chittenden County or northern Vermont, and that's to minimize the potential that we're going to have coworkers, peers of the members who are on the board, people who they've known and practiced with, or for our public members, it hopefully won't be their personal physicians who are on the board, or people who they know socially. And so it just helps to have things be a little bit more, people can be more comfortable that it's not who
That'd be a little awkward. That'd be great.
So yeah, so then what we do is that, and actually one of the neat things about our board, and some boards now have gone to basically having investigations done by professional investigators and having staff and maybe having a staff physician or 2 on the board that works at the board full time, giving medical input, and they investigate the case from the beginning all the way up until the point where they're ready to recommend a resolution. And that's not how we do it. Our board members, as I said, they are really involved. Every case from the get-go, when I open up the case, I assign it, I say what committee it's going to be in, and I assign one of our investigators to investigate, and I assign the lead board member who will be responsible for the case, and also the assistant attorney general. We have assistant AGs who work with us on a regular basis, but then the case goes to the committee, and everybody on that committee becomes familiar with the case, and it's the committee that, as a group, leads our investigation, which is really a wonderful process because you have all this knowledge and all these different perspectives, public members, physicians who have different kinds of practice. We have some fairly young physicians. We have physicians who are near the end of their career, and just so much wisdom goes into, looking at these cases and deciding what do we need to, they give us input as staff members, the full-time staff, of what do they need to resolve the case, and what more evidence do they want to have, what witnesses should be interviewed. And so it's I think our process is just great. When the committee comes to the point where they recommend a resolution, it's pretty much going to be one of two things. Either they're going to recommend something more, at which point we start negotiating. Our rules require us to ask present the problem to the licensee and say, we think we have a problem here and you want to discuss a resolution. And like I said, most of the cases, they see the point and they'll agree to a resolution, or else we have to bring charges and say these are the things they did wrong, and then it can go to a contested case where we have to present our evidence. So the committee comes to a decision, but then we got those other two committees that haven't been involved with the case, and that's when they act like in what we call a quasi-judicial capacity, where if the case goes to a hearing, or to get the stipulation, the agreement of resolution of a case, has to be approved by those other board members who hadn't been involved to that point.
Great.
So that's how we're able to have our board members, they get so much knowledge of how the investigations work and what the standards are, and through the investigation process. But then they also can use all that wisdom and knowledge when they act on the cases in a more of a judicial perspective.
Yeah, boy, they're really involved. You've got a working board. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. So they all give up. We have set meetings every month, and so just today I spent much of the day in a meeting. Of course, we don't travel as much as we normally do right now. We're doing it with remote virtual video meetings, but normally we meet. We have the North Committee meets in Burlington, and the Central Committee meets in the Montpelier area, and the South Committee meets in Rutland. So they all give up a day for that committee work, and they got lots of homework. I mean, they may have thousands of pages of records that they have to review and be ready to discuss the cases. And then we have a full board meeting once a month, and we have been meeting at Gifford Medical Center for years in their conference center, and they've been great hosts. But we're actually looking at, because of the COVID crisis has really kind of reminded us all the hospitals may not be the best place to be meeting. And so we're trying to figure out where we're going to meet in a good central location like that.
Food's good at Gifford, though.
It is.
I have heard that.
It is.
I've heard that. Something, David, I think you mentioned briefly earlier, but maybe we can expand on, is the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, which is the IMLCC. I think I got that right.
That's right. Yeah.
And can you explain, that went into effect this year, correct?
Right. Well, the compact started a few years ago, and so it became effective in Vermont this year. And sorry, I know if you can hear my dog is making a little bit of noise.
All right.
Sorry about that.
We love dogs.
So the IMLC became effective on January 1st this year in Vermont, and we've issued a lot of licenses already through the IMLC. And the IMLC was a the states, we came together. I was at the first meeting. And we've, there've been discussions for years where people said, as we talked earlier about everything it takes to get a medical license, and there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of scrutiny that goes into it. And the bottom line is boards, every state board, they want to do their own work. You don't want to just necessarily trust what somebody else did. But so we finally, though, came to the conclusion that let's get together and come up with some standards that everybody would agree. These are, basically no-brainers. There's nobody in the world that would not give this physician a license. And so they came up with some criteria about, you can't have a criminal conviction, and you can't have had a board disciplinary case. And most licensees don't have a board disciplinary case in any state where you're licensed, and things like that. And so if they have board certification, which is a whole separate thing, it's not medical board certification, it's specialty board certification. And so as long as they're board certified and they meet the criteria to be in the compact, there's the compact provides a framework where, and you have to be licensed in a state that's a member of the compact. And I think we're up to about 30 states now participate in the compact. So, if you have a physician who's in New Hampshire and they're members of the compact and they want to get licensed in Vermont, they have to, there is an additional fee to be in the compact as a licensee, but they pay a little bit extra, and the process is really streamlined where they just, New Hampshire issues a letter saying, yeah, they meet these criteria, and send it through the compact to us, and then we can issue a license.
David, I'm listening to you, and how long did it take you to get up to speed with what you're doing medically? I mean, I don't think you've had any medical background. I know you're a great attorney, but how do you even talk to these people about these cases? Because you need to know something about medicine, I would think.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why I was able to get the job is I had experience working in a lot of different administrative side of medicine, and you may remember I was counsel for the state health insurance plan. And so became familiar with a lot of medical issues there. And believe it or not, I had a number of cases, disputes as an assistant attorney general where there were medical issues involved. So I guess I had a little bit of background to build on, and and the cases that are most common, you see over and over again, and you start to learn, and every day, that's one of the things I love about my job. Every day is a learning experience.
Yes, you've got so much on your plate. I can't believe it. And I don't think a lot of Vermonters, as you mentioned in the beginning, really know that the medical board exists, because I was sort of one of them for a while. And I said, where is he working? I mean, what is that thing? It's really amazing.
And it's so important, because I hate to think of people just being upset and thinking they're only, like, everybody knows about malpractice cases, and it can take a lot of money to bring a malpractice case, and and you're only going to find a lawyer to do that if you let's say you were injured and out of work for a long time and had a lot of damages, so that the case would make for a large award that would be able to fund all those expenses of bringing the case. And that's not what we're about. We do deal with a lot of cases that have issues similar to malpractice. We ask, did they fail to meet the standard of care? And we don't care about the economic damages. So, it's something that's available to everybody. And I just think that if sometimes we get cases where people complain about their doctor, they felt like the doctor didn't treat them right, and there have been instances where those cases reveal somebody who's really got a personal problem that needs to be addressed, and it's a great public service to come forward and let us know about that. And as I said, the cases are confidential, unless and until we find a problem that makes it public. And so, people don't need to worry about necessarily. I mean, I know it's not a nice experience for a physician to have a complaint brought and be under investigation, but it doesn't destroy somebody's career to just have one of these confidential investigations going on.
Right. It sounds very intense. Ben, do you have any other questions?
Well, I'm just wondering, do you get a lot of, because you kind of alluded to it there a little bit, where a complaint may be driven more about a personality than about a standard of care issue. And I'm wondering how many of those types of complaints you get, or if you have a sense of that.
We get a certain number of those every year. And actually, though, it's enough of a concern. In my first year with the board, we did a revision to the laws, and we added what's known as a disruptive physician provision to the unprofessional conduct statute. And so basically what it says is, that it's unprofessional conduct to engage in, interact with people in a way that could lead to bad patient care. I'm paraphrasing, but and it's really important, because if you have a doctor who's just acts mean and dismissive toward patients, the patients are going to be they're not going to be feeling comfortable that they can share everything, and so or if they're it's not just patients, it's also coworkers. If you have a physician who's acts inappropriately toward coworkers, nurses, or junior physicians, and they feel like they can't speak up, that's dangerous, and that's not good for patient safety either. So those cases sometimes I probably shouldn't say this, but people will joke about, my doctor said I was fat complaint, but sometimes, like I said, it can reveal a problem with a personal problem with a physician that they need some help, and frankly, one of the big issues in medicine that we talk about across the country, and the national groups who deal with medical boards, we all talk about it when we get together, and that is physician suicide and physician burnout are big problems now. So those really can be signs of underlying problems. So it's, we're not out there, we aren't in the business of trying to give doctors a hard time. We're in the business of trying to protect the public and promote good medical practice. And so, helping physicians be ready to provide good care is really the bottom line.
I think these days, physicians are pretty wary of being sued. I know you and I were talking a while ago about the board recommended the way physicians should do exams in outpatient setting, and I'm sure part of that was because they want to make sure the doctor does the right thing and handles it correctly and doesn't open him or herself up for a lawsuit, because that's happening. People are so litigious, it's ridiculous.
Right, and that's the recommendations in that policy about intimate exams. We came to that, and a lot of boards have policies, and the AMA has policies on use of chaperones and issues like that. We saw patterns of what kinds of things were causing complaints, and sometimes they're really difficult cases because. You may have a physician, and very often, typically, it's a male physician and a female patient when we see these complaints, and if they don't have a chaperone in the room, if they aren't good about saying what's going to be happening during the exam, so that there's surprises during the exam that make the patient uncomfortable, those kinds of things. So that's why we create those kinds of policies to try and avoid complaints. And we're not in the business of protecting physicians, but on issues like that, we try and create guidance that will avoid complaints that are difficult to investigate and leave physicians open to speculation that they've done something wrong when it's tough when there's only two people in the room.
Yeah, well, and it's avoiding misunderstandings too between a doctor and a patient. One thing is we've only got a few minutes left here, but something we should ask about is what you've seen, if anything, in adjusting your policies for the coronavirus response. I know a lot of states have looked at streamlining some of the processes for getting doctors out in the field. And have you contemplated that at all, or seen any?
Oh yeah.
Lines?
So the legislature was amazing. I spent the whole day, March 13th. They pulled us all together and had us doing homework, getting ready, and we with the House Healthcare Committee. And I'm going to call out one, Jen Carby, one of the staff attorneys, did amazing work. And we started a bill on the 13th of March that ended up being Act 91. And it continued through, and Jen continued to work with the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. And it actually went through a number of committees and both chambers. But so we passed a lot of emergency measures. And previously, the board didn't have the ability to grant emergency licenses, and the board got that ability. And we got a number of flexibilities, and we've been using those. We've granted a number of emergency licenses. We, in certain situations, physicians who are licensed in good standing in the states where they are licensed, and like if they come and practice in a hospital, and they're and the hospital staffs, they do their own credentialing process, they're deemed to be licensed. So and that's just for the during the state of emergency. So we put a number of things with the assistance of the I shouldn't say we helped the legislature to write laws that were signed and supported by the governor to put emergency measures into place that have helped a lot.
That's great. David, we thank you very much. I see we've sort of run out of time here, and it's been very interesting. I will get the contact information from you to put at the end of the video, and we wish you well, and thank you for your service. I'm surprised that you stepped down, but I think after 33 years, it was probably time, eh?
Yeah, it was. It was. So,
anyway, thank you all. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.